Okay, I think I'll go ahead and start. Good morning and welcome to the Spring Gardening webinar series presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners, Oregon State University, and our sponsors. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, cloudy, typical April day. My name is Pat Coling and I will be your host. The other Master Gardener assisting behind the scenes today is Frank Natali. Our presenter is Dan Denning, who will walk you through the regionally appropriate steps to a Xeriscape conversion, including planning, demolition, soil prep, planting, irrigation, and identifying available resources and rebates available. As the impacts to water resources and frequency of drought conditions increase in Central Oregon, a common adaptive strategy to decrease water consumption conditions increase in Central Oregon. Common adaptive strategies to decrease water consumption in the home or business is to reduce the amount of non-functional high water need plant material and retrofit low efficiency irrigation systems. Commonly faced challenges to replacement include planning out the necessary steps, finding resources, and setting yourself up for success by choosing appropriate plant and irrigation material to maintain your beautiful new landscape. But first, some housekeeping for our webinar. All videos and microphones are off, except for the presenters. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A window. We will reserve time at the end to answer anything that was not addressed during the slide presentation. The presentation is being recorded and will be available online for a short period of time following the session. A few days after the session, you will be sent an email with a link to access the recording. Dan Denning is the Water Conservation Program Manager for the City of Bend, Oregon. In his role, he oversees the implementation of the numerous conservation program efforts that meet state regulatory requirements and reduce water demands to create resiliency to drought and buffer the effects of growth. Conservation efforts are aimed at maximizing indoor-outdoor water use efficiency through education, technical assistance, and financial incentive programs. Dan started his career in the green industry in 1998, working for various landscape companies and nurseries, eventually owning his own business as a licensed landscape contractor. He holds several certifications in irrigation water management from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, is a certified landscape irrigation auditor with the Irrigation Association, and holds a BS degree in natural resource policy and management from Oregon State University. At this point, I will turn things over to Dan. Okay,
good morning,
Dan?
folks. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, bear with me 1 second while I go through the sausage making of sharing my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? You should just be able to see my slides now.
Yeah, it looks good.
Perfect, thank you, Frank. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Dan Denning. Thanks for the really nice introduction, Pat. I'm honored to be here talking to everybody today about xeriscaping in Central Oregon. It's a pretty large topic, so we're going to try to get through it in an hour and hopefully be able to leave some time to answer your questions. And so the agenda today is we'll walk through the 7 steps of a xeriscape. I'll lead into it with kind of the situation of water here in the city of Bend, and we'll end with telling you a little bit about a new program that we have and where you can find resources and access funds if you're interested in tackling a Xeriscape project. So just to start, you know, whether the impacts are environmental or human caused, there are more and more stressors to our water resources here in the West. You know, from population growth being an anthropogenic stressor to drought or more frequency of drought being an environmental stressor. It adds to the variability of when our water resources are available and how much is available to us when we share those water resources with the natural environment as well as with other users. And so on this graph, you can just see kind of the concentrated, hopefully you can see my cursor here, the concentrated number of extreme droughts that we've had lately. And whether this is cyclical or a permanent change, it doesn't matter for us. It's something that we need to deal with and adapt to. And so some folks might ask, you know, well, why do conservation, right? We're sitting at the foothills of the Cascades. And the simple answer is we have to. As a water utility, we are required to have a conservation program in place. That's across the state of Oregon. The size of the programs will vary depending on the size of the utility and their resources and amount of staff they have. But every 10 years with a 5-year interval for an update, we do an engineering exercise called a water management and conservation plan, where we record and report to the state how we're producing water and what type of conservation efforts we're doing to deserve our water rights. So it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have for us. And our latest evaluation showed that we needed to save 7.9 billion gallons of water by 2040. So we've got a pretty hefty task ahead of us. And so what we do, and you'll see why here in a minute, is a large portion of our programs and partnerships are focused around the landscape and irrigation industry just because of the impact that they have on our water resources. Luckily, in the city of Bend, we're fortunate enough to have a dual source system. And what that means is we have surface water rights up here in the foothills of the Cascades. Right below Broken Top, we have spring-fed surface water diversion in Bridge Creek. And then throughout town, we have 20 different groundwater wells that are in the Deschutes Aquifer that we supplement during the summer months when irrigation turns on. You know, obviously, you know, groundwater is expensive. Our surface water flows downhill by gravity, 800 feet in elevation. So it comes into our treatment plant at 400 PSI. So it's very carbon neutral water. We don't have to pump this water, right? Our water source is very pristine. We're lucky enough to have a pristine water source. The groundwater, on the other hand, again, due to the demands in the summer, we need to supplement our water resources, and that's expensive. So here you can see this is water production in the city of Bend over the course of a year. So you can see our indoor use during the winter months, and we have a 5-time increase during the summer. This is all landscape irrigation. We don't serve any golf courses. We don't serve any agricultural customers. This is all commercial and residential landscape irrigation. And so here's another way of looking at it by our customer classes. So this is single family residential, commercial, and multifamily. So you can see the impact that summer irrigation has on our water system. And because we have more single family residential customers, you see a larger contribution or demand by that single family customer class. And so if we were to split out that water use, 60% of our total water produced during the year, this chunk right here, goes to landscapes. And based off of our field evaluations and tests, about 14% of those systems should not be operating. They operate at such a low efficiency. There's so many issues with them that they're actually not even effective as an irrigation system in getting water to the plants, and that they should be off. And 58% of those that we've tested over the thousands of evaluations we've done, are operating below at some point a level of basic efficiency. So meaning that there is improvements that need to be made. And so that kind of sets the stage of why we're talking about xeriscaping as an option in Bend. And not to be confused, we hear the term xeroscaping a lot. Xeriscaping is actually a holistic process to designing a landscape. And it's based from the term xeric, which means a habitat containing little moisture, an arid region, right? So Xeriscape has been around, or this methodology has been around for a long time, since I think like the 80s in Colorado when they coined it. But there's essentially 7 steps to a Xeriscape, and you'll see these listed in different orders sometimes, depending on where you're looking, but they're the same basic steps are all the same. And that's a proper plan and design, your demolition, preparing the site, building your soil, installing efficient irrigation, choosing regionally appropriate plants and grouping them in correct hydrozones, your mulch or your ground cover, and proper maintenance. So we'll go through all those steps today. So, excuse me, a Xeriscape versus a Xeroscape. We've heard this advertised lately, and basically what it's advertised as is minimal plants. The goal is the same. I should say this. The goal is trying to lower water use. One functions better as an ecological system, and one does not. So a Xeroscape is minimal plantings, rock mulch, and no irrigation after establishment. So the intent there is they don't want to water after they get their plants established for a year. A Xeriscape, however, is a little more holistic, a little more geared towards the function of this landscape. So prioritizing our plants for the region, removal of unfunctional turf, not just all turf, but just the unfunctional turf. Let's prioritize that, right? Because turf does have some ecosystem benefits in the right place if it's utilized. Efficient irrigation, used supplementally, right? Not overused. Minimized use of herbicides, and mulch ground covers to reduce weeds and maintain moisture. And the difference is long-term, one is very lush, inviting, enjoyable, creates habitat, is aesthetically pleasing, maintains the value of your home or landscape. One over time in Central Oregon just does not function well. And you end up with weeds and other pioneer species taking over, and desiccation of the plant material that you originally intended to be there. And you're either left with more maintenance and more use of herbicide, or you're left with something that is not what we want. Let's just put it that way. Xeroscaping is also not moonscaping, right? So this is a local example of, this is not what we were talking about when we talk about turf removal. This, you might have heard of like heat island effects. So when you don't have plant material in here that's transpiring and cooling, basically like a radiator, right? It has a cooling effect. When you have all this radiated heat around these plants, this tree is actually going to need more water than it would if it was surrounded by other plant material, because that transpiration acts as a cooling, has cooling effects, and they'll work in sync with each other, right? So we'll talk about that in a little bit, and the benefits of having other plants in here. So we don't want to see that. So let's start with the first step in our design. Landscapes are little mini ecosystems, and all the aspects from your soil to the mulch to the irrigation to the plant material you choose to the nutrients we provide supplementally, all help it function properly if well planned and maintained. And so a design can contribute to the longevity, the functionality, how many resources we need to provide it, and the amount of maintenance that we're going to provide it over the lifetime of that landscape. And so part of that is our plant choices, right? So here's a little matrix of different styles and combinations of landscape and their corresponding water use. And so this is just an example off of 1,000 square feet of landscape, what your annual water use would be. And so we can we can decide these during our design phase based off of our plant placement and plant choices. And this is going to affect our long-term water bills and maintenance costs. So a few basic design elements that we want to consider that are very important and have repercussions later are, the grade and drainage. How does water move off of our property? Can we capture some of that water and store it in swales or berms for use by plants? Where is the water going to go when we get those, summer deluges that we've experienced over the last couple of years, where we got like an inch of rain or 3/4 of an inch of rain in, less than an hour? We're seeing that variability in precipitation and climate start to happen here in Bend. So consideration of, where is that water going to go? Our hardscape, so our pathways, our living spaces, where are we going to recreate and use our landscape in our yard? The softscape, so our plant choices, choosing the correct species, the aspect. Hydrozoning is really important later on for the water use of what types of plants we're grouping together. And then the fire-wise considerations. This is another growing topic here in the city of Bend. So what types of ground cover are we putting in? The spacing of our plants, the type of species of plants that we're using. They're fire-wise or less flammable species out there. OSU has some great guides when you're looking for those type of plant species. And then, can turf be part of a xeriscape? And the answer is yes. If not overused, if properly maintained and efficiently watered, a functional piece of turf can be part of a xeriscape. And so let's define what is functional turf. Non-functional turf is something that, we're just using to cover space, right? Are we just covering ground, or is it going to be functional and recreational and add recreational possibilities? Or we just don't know what to do, so we're going to roll out the green carpet, right? And that has repercussions. There's no way to irrigate this strip of lawn without getting water in the street. And you can see the watermarks running down here. It's going to be really hard to apply fertilizer to that, right? So then we're washing nutrients down into our stormwater basins, which go into our groundwater. So we're affecting water quality. So there's lots of benefits to really thinking out where we're using turf appropriately. And so functional turf is, for my definition that I'm going to offer up today, is something that we're going to use that has a benefit for parks, schools, fields, gathering spaces, so something that's, close to the home, creates an inviting space where you can go out and sit down with friends or family and enjoy it, right? We're not going to play a game of soccer most likely in our street strip. So that's probably not an appropriate place for turf, right? So let's just think of what are our needs and what are we going to use this area for when we're deciding where to put turf. So once we have a design that we're ready to start our project, we need to think of demolition. So this is the really physical and laborious part of this that we don't want to underestimate, because those rolls of sod right there are very heavy, and we're going to move quite a bit of them, and we're going to need the machinery or the truck and trailer to be able to move those. So there's two options we're going to offer up. These, we're trying to stay away from the use of herbicides for killing our lawn and offer up a few things. One is soil layering. So this is a decomposition method. And one is a mechanical removal. Mechanical removal is obviously very quick, but can be physical labor. The decomposition, the downside of those is it takes a very long time. We're in arid climate, and you need moisture to facilitate that decomposition process. So be prepared for it to take multiple years to happen, but it is less physical. We're basically laying down some cardboard, some mulch, and we're keeping it moist and waiting for that decomposition to kill that turf. So two available methods. You decide what's the best method for you. In our turf removal program, either one of those is fine. What we don't want to see is people going out with a tank of Roundup and spraying their yard. And then please, before you start digging or using the sod cutter, if you're going that route, call 811 before you dig. It's super important. There's been numerous times where I've heard of someone hitting a gas line with a pickaxe, only 8 inches below the soil. Unfortunately, due to our rocky soil, sometimes when utilities go in, they don't always break through that rock, and we've seen gas lines go up and over a rock shelf, and unfortunately someone hit that with a pickaxe. No one's hurt, but it becomes a setback and a dangerous situation. So call 811 before you dig. It's free. They'll come out and identify all your utilities for you if you're tackling this yourself, and make sure your contractor is doing that too if you hire a contractor. The other piece of this is, we want to maintain the health of our trees. Trees have many benefits, and we want to keep those healthy and thriving. So if you decide to go the sod remover or the sod cutter route, you might want to do some handwork underneath the drip line. You can see all the roots underneath this aspen here. Especially if there's turf there before, some of those roots are usually pretty shallow. They're up at the surface where they were getting plentiful water with the turf, right? So this is handwork with a mattox or a pick to get in between those and lessen the damage to the tree during removal. The other thing we want to do is when we excavate, we want to get a good 3 to 4 inch subgrade because we're going to be adding amendment to this, and we're going to be adding our mulch and building that up. And we don't want to be over that curb line or that sidewalk line where things are spilling into the street, right? So a good 3 to 4 inch subgrade is what you want to end up with. And then most importantly is we're at the step of soil amendment, okay? So proper, healthy, functioning soil stores water, which is really important in the high desert, makes it available for plants. If we have organic matter and, all the beneficial microbes in there, it's providing and releasing nutrients to our plants so we can minimize fertilizer needs. And if we have the correct structure and pore space in there, we have the exchange of oxygen, carbon, and everything. Soil is a living, no pun intended, breathing entity. And unfortunately, in an urban environment, we counteract some of this natural soil's capability in the development process. So you can kind of see the split in our native forest soils versus our urban soils, where they're scraped and heavily compacted, and sometimes aggregate is put in there and compacted for sidewalks and streets and things like that. So the soil we're planting in our yards often isn't native soil and needs some sort of amendment to allow more air and water and add that organic material to our soil. And so that can be done with various products from compost, soil builders, any kind of organic material that adds that pore space for water holding capacity. So water is held longer in the soil profile so roots can access it. Our coarse sandy soils tend to act like a sieve. Water infiltrates through them pretty quickly. What we want to create is more of a sponge effect where that water is held in those pore spaces longer where the roots can access it. Once it starts moving down through the soil profile, that gravitational pull is stronger than what the plant's roots can counteract. And so here's, we have kind of a sandy loam type soil here in Bend. And so you can see in a foot of soil, we only have an inch of water that's available and held for plants to access, right? So not very much. So we'll get into some of that with the irrigation piece here. And so irrigation is important because we are using a resource that's finite. And responsible irrigation practices support our sustainable landscape, right? So we'll go through the types of irrigation, the efficiency, and drip. So a few items here, types of irrigation. These are all what we call high efficiency nozzles. The benefit to these, or the difference, is that they're applying water, at a much slower rate, half to a quarter of the rate of your typical spray head. So the water can infiltrate at a reasonable rate and not run off the top of the soil. It delivers water in large droplets, so it can withstand wind. We all know wind is pretty prevalent here in Central Oregon, especially on the east side of town. And so due to the efficiency, which we'll talk about here in a second, even though it's a slower application rate and we might be running it a little bit longer because of that, the distribution of the water is what we're concerned with. And when I talk about the distribution of water, I'm talking about the evenness of water that's applied over the intended area, right? So if we have pressure that's too high, water that's applied too quickly, a lot of those spray nozzles can apply water at 2 inches an hour, which is more than our soil can absorb, or we have spacing issues, you start to see the unevenness of water, right? So too much water applied here and not enough applied here. So when we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about the delivery of water that comes out of these different sprinkler types. And the efficiency is where we save water, right? This is all wasted water that's percolating through the ground. That's groundwater recharge right there. So what we want to do is apply it evenly so we don't see any stress in the plant, and effectively. And so we can test this. So one of the things we can do is we can measure how effective, how quickly the water is being applied, and how effectively it's being applied. And that informs us of where we need to make changes in our system, with renozzling, with addressing pressure, or moving sprinklers, etc. And so here's kind of an example. When we're talking about different types of irrigation, this is high efficiency nozzles installed at Holland's Head Garden. This is point source drip. So you can see this has implications to our maintenance too, right? So these are both efficient applications of water. However, high efficiency nozzles you might want to use in a more dense planting, because your maintenance here is going to be weeds, right? You're going to be weeding in all these unplanted areas because you're applying water to them. And the plants aren't necessarily accessing the water out here. So you might have more maintenance with weed abatement. Here, you're not going to get as many weeds in between these planted areas, but the maintenance is involved with the drip upkeep, right? So maintenance either way. There's no maintenance-free garden, but you choose what type of maintenance you're going to have. Pressure. This is a really important piece. One thing I just want to show you is that increased pressure is not necessarily better. What happens when we increase pressure is that water atomizes, right? So we're pushing the water through the sprinkler with more force, and that orifice that the water is coming out has not changed. And so that water droplet breaks up, atomizes, becomes mist, and doesn't make it to our plant material. At the same time, with more force, with more pressure added, our flows increase. So our sprinklers are putting water out faster, less effectively, okay? So this blue radius here is the intended arc of this sprinkler, 15-foot half sprinkler. At 30 PSI, the intended manufacturer's pressure, you can see we're covering that area pretty good. When that pressure increases by 20 PSI, that same sprinkler, this is where we're going to see all those dry spots, right? So basically that sprinkler is just misting and the water is blowing in the wind and not making it to our plant material. And this is where we see stress in our landscape, right? And when we talk about head-to-head coverage, and all these arcs and sprinklers should be spraying back and forth to each other, these are the types of things that we're going out and measuring, right? Is how effectively is that water being put down, and how much more water do we have to apply to compensate for those inconsistencies. So just a quick heads up, depending on the nozzles you're using, you can regulate pressure with special types of sprinkler bodies, or you can regulate pressure at the valve or on your main line of the irrigation system, depending on where you are. If you're in Bend, we have areas of town that get 90 PSI of pressure, and we have other areas of town that get 40 PSI. we have a huge area. And if you think about a water system, it's basically a giant irrigation system. And so all the branching and how close they are to the water source or the reservoir will affect the pressure, okay? So some of these high efficiency nozzles, they work best at 45 to 40 PSI, your MP rotators, your Toro Precisions, and your Rambert R-bands. And this is a dynamic pressure. So this is measured at the head, not in the main line, right? Not your static pressure. This is when water's moving through the system. So our second option here, and why we're talking about this today, we're going to spend a little more time on drip, is because it is the most efficient method of irrigation. You're putting water right at the plant roots. There's little to no effect on environmental influence. You're minimizing evaporation. You're minimizing the effects of wind. It's often covered with mulch, so you're retaining that moisture longer. And it's a very slow application, right? So the plants have more access to that water for longer. Some of the pros, you know, things I just mentioned, right? Not affected by wind. And then one that we'll touch on today is the versatility. So you can, there's many different types of drip components and flows. And so we can really customize our irrigation system to meet the needs of all the different plants in our landscape. Versus with sprays, it's one flow rate coming out there and you hope the plants get what they need, right? So less management capability with the spray system. The cons, it can be a little more consuming, time consuming to install for sure. If we're not doing it correctly and we've got spaghetti tube all over the place, it can be unsightly and require a little more maintenance. So let's look at how drip and water interact with the soil, okay? So we have very coarse sandy soils, so you can see, you know, the drip emitters here, and they put a dye in the water, and then they dug down in the soil profile, and you can see the shape that the water takes, right? Unlike in the valley where we have clay soils and it moves horizontally, right? That water spreads out a little bit more before it can infiltrate. We have this kind of carrot shape where water moves pretty well in a very slender column through our soil profile. So this is another reason. So this will affect where we put our emitters so that we're providing water to the roots. It also, you know, begs for amendment. And this is one of the reasons why we need to amend our soil and change that water holding capacity. So when we have different types of drip, you know, there's different placement options, okay? With trees, the wetted area, we want to be out here by the drip line. This is where the feeder roots are on those trees. And so we never on any plant want to put our drip emitters right up around the crown of the plant, right? We don't need water here. The feeder roots are out here around the drip line of the plant. So you can see these drip rings being applied out by the feeder roots of the plant, right? Or the root ball if this is just planted. What we get here, if we have drip emitters, I've seen them like laying in the plant, and we get crown rot, and that's not where it's being utilized, right? So we need to put the water in the correct place. So there's inline irrigation. So this actually has emitters spaced out every foot in the drip line itself. And we run this in a pattern, a grid pattern. So spaced out about a foot apart. And this is for high density plantings, right? So you can see the pattern of water applied here. This would be perfect for like a very formal or linear type of maybe ornamental grass layout or something like that. Your point source drip is going to be for more spaced out clustered plantings where we don't want to apply water everywhere. And then of course, when we do a turf removal, we want to make sure that we're providing water to the trees. And so these concentric rings around the tree here provide adequate water to those trees in our new landscape situation. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, you know, for different size shrubs, we never want, this is a good example, we never want one drip emitter next to a plant. What happens is because of that water profile, this side of the plant gets water to the roots and this side dries out and desiccates. And you'll actually see there's photos I've seen where, half of the plant is dead and half of the plant is alive. So one thing to remember with the drip is we need to get emitters on both sides of the plant. And that's why we use these rings right here. So the drip emitter is actually right here. And we put this inline ring right here to distribute water all the way around the plant. So this 1/4-inch tube has those emitters spaced out every 6 inches on it. And that distributes the water evenly around the plant. So that's one approach to making sure that our plants have enough water. So at our drip point of connection, drip operates at a lower pressure. For most drip emitters, if our pressure is too low, below 10 psi, they're in flush mode. So they're actually not putting the water out at their regulated flow of 1 gallon or 2 gallons an hour. They're actually just flushing water out. So we need to make sure that we've got, 15 to 20 psi running through our drip. And to regulate pressure, we can do point of connections in 2 different ways. This is called a retro kit. This has your filter and your pressure regulator inside the sprinkler body. And so you can pretty much just retrofit your irrigation system at one of the existing sprinkler heads and start running drip off of it. This is a little bit more, this is like for a new install or, someone who is a little more experienced with irrigation, and you actually add another valve with a filter and a pressure regulator in line in your valve box. So this is kind of the quick fix. So you can choose one sprinkler head in your planter, essentially unscrew the top, take out the internal pieces, and replace it with the pieces of this retro kit. And that's your point of connection. And then what you do is you just cap off the other heads or other sprinklers in that planter. And now you've just converted to drip. So a pretty plug and play, easy way to do that drip conversion. And so we'll talk a little bit about pressure regulation and pressure compensation. I want to make sure I'm on time here. Pressure regulation is reducing pressure, right? We talked about the operating pressure of 15 to 20 psi. A pressure regulator takes incoming pressure and reduces it down to a set amount. Pressure compensation ensures proper flow out of the sprinkler, or if this is a 1 gallon per hour emitter, it ensures 1 gallon per hour is coming out of this emitter, regardless of the pressure in the line coming to it. Okay. So we know that pressure changes with elevation, right? So if you have undulations or, grade changes or a lot of sprinklers on a line, that pressure is going to change through that line. You might have 10 psi at the end of the line and 30 psi closer to the source, right? So pressure compensating emitters, both of which inline emitters and these bug emitters have, ensures that the right amount of flow is going to come out of this regardless of where this is on your drip line. So that's very important. That's why soaker hoses don't really work really well, right? They just have a bunch of holes in them. And so the water coming out in the beginning is a lot higher flow than the water coming out at the end of that line. So it's hard to regulate how much water we're applying. These micro sprays are not pressure compensating and have a very high flow. So that's all I want to show you here is that these micro sprays they don't have the same benefits as traditional drip, okay? They can be used, they have their place for sure, but we don't want to be mixing these on the same line as bug emitters for that fact that they are not pressure compensating. These are, so these will ensure the right amount of water is coming out, whatever their specified flow rate is. This will vary. And when you're trying to fine tune those with a little dial, it's very hard to tell what your flow rate is off of those. You would need some additional measurement. So what we want to do when we're running our tubing, if we're doing point source with the little bug emitters, we want to get our distribution tube as close to our plantings as we can so we can minimize the amount of spaghetti tubing we've got running, right? You never want to have more than about 5 feet of this for hydraulic reasons, running 2 plants. And just for minimizing maintenance, nice short runs of that to your plants are going to minimize this getting caught by a rake or what have you or popping up through the soil and moving around and not, being next to your plant anymore. So we like to trench in our drip, make sure it doesn't move or heave out of the soil, and get it as close to our planting clusters as we can. You have different type of fittings. So you have compression fittings where the 1/2-inch pipe pushes into this and gets compressed into the fitting. You have inserted barbs that go inside of the pipe and have barbs that hold that pipe together. And then you have twist locks, which is a combination of a barb. So the pipe slides over the barb and this collar twists down over it and makes sure that the pipe doesn't pop off. These are a little more expensive, but if any of your drip lines exposed, heating up in the sun, these can pop off as that tube softens in the sun. So either make sure this is covered with mulch or something that keeps it out of the heat, or twist lock fittings are a great option to make sure you don't have pipes coming apart or issues with your drip line. The other piece that's super important, and this is super helpful for folks, an air relief valve, okay, and an automatic flush valve. So the flush valve is located here at the end of our drip line. The air relief valve is located here at the beginning of our drip line. When we're burying this subsurface or under the soil, which is a good place for our drip to be so it doesn't, pop out and get caught on things and create a maintenance nightmare, we bury this 2 inches below soil. The air relief valve, when irrigation turns off, if you've ever had issues with your drip clogging, when irrigation turns off, there's a little vacuum that happens, right? That flow of water is moving through the valve, it suddenly stops and we get a little bit of vacuum, okay? That's what brings those soil particles into the drip and clogs your emitters. So an air relief valve is like an anti-siphon backflow. It just gives it a little burp of air and releases, it counteracts that siphon. So you're not sucking any dirt into your drip. The flush valve on the end opens when that valve first starts up. So anything that made it into the drip line doesn't get pushed out through the emitter and clog it. It comes out through this flush valve, okay? So 2 components to long-term success. They're probably less than $5 to $10 a piece, and they'll increase the longevity and function of your drip system, especially if it's in there for any amount of time or you can't get to checking it every year. These are 2 items that will help with that. The last item is a lot of people say, well, I don't know when my drip's running. So there's these little drip indicators that you can punch right into your drip line and they pop up when that zone is running. So on a long run, like in our right-of-ways along the street, we might put one at the beginning of the line and at the end of the line. So we know where the zone begins and ends for that station. Okay. So drip scheduling. So this is a fun part. This is the math, right? So all I want you to know from this is you can calculate the amount of water your plants need. It's been done in agriculture since like the 30s or 40s. It's been applied in the landscape industry since, the 70s or 80s, and it can be done. And there are resources out there. So the things we need to schedule run times are obviously our plant type that dictates our water need, the square footage of our landscape or the canopy of, let's say this is a tree, right? So our square footage of what we need to water. Our plant types can be found in these guides that we have. So OSU put out their Waterwise gardening guide and listed all their plants by moderate, low, or very low water needs. And if you go to our irrigation guide, we tell you what the crop coefficient is for those plants. So you can actually calculate the water need that you need, or the water you need to put down on your landscape, okay? And the driver of what changes that water need throughout the season is called evapotranspiration, or ETO. And it's basically the water that evaporates out of the soil and the water that's uptaken by the plant and transpired back into the environment, okay? So that's water loss in this reservoir of water, and it's a number that tells us how much we need to apply back to the plant, okay? And so there's lots of resources for that. This is what I was referring to as the plant factor. So if we have a moderate water use plant, you're at 0.5 or 50% of ETO. So that plant needs 0.5 inches of water replenished to it, okay, on whatever the temporal scale is, if that's a day or a week, etc. And I'll show you how all that goes together. And again, the ring size is important, right? When we're doing those point source drip rings, how we put the drip around those plants. This might be an 18 diameter drip ring, a 24 around that blue mist spirea, and a 36 around, I think that's a serviceberry. Okay, so the placement is important there. Now the math piece. Okay, so putting it together, how much water do we need? Okay, this is a weather station we have in here in Bend that measures that evapotranspiration. It'll give you a daily value of the number of inches to apply to your plant material on a daily basis. Okay, and we take that number, and if our coefficient, our plant water need is a 0.5, that's 50% of this number. Okay, so if this Gaillardia is a 0.5, we know we can take this number, let's say it's 1/10 of an inch a day, and we know we need half of that. So 5/10 of an inch a day is what we need to put down. And I'll tell you how to convert that. How long our runtime is going to be is how much area do we have to apply that water over, so that plant canopy, and then how fast can we apply it, dictated by our irrigation that we use. Okay, that's the basis of an irrigation schedule. So here's just a quick piece just to show you how it's done. So our ETO for the year is 30 inches of water in Bend. Okay, so this is our reference crop water need, 30 inches a year, multiplied by our conversion factor. So this is the number of gallons per square foot. Okay, so 0.623 gallons will fill a square foot an inch high. Okay, so we've taken inches, converted it to gallons. We multiply it by our crop coefficient. This is our moderate water use plant, by our canopy area. So let's say we have a shrub with a 2-foot radius. This is the number of square feet in that circle. So we need to apply 117 gallons a year to that plant. And you can figure that out. So you could divide that by the number of weeks in the growing season, etc. Or you could just take that daily or weekly ETO number instead of using the year and figure out what you need per day. Okay, so we've got resources online that show you how to do this. We can come do this for you in some of the evaluations we offer during the summer. It's up to you. So what we can do, the nice thing about drip, is we can calibrate with the flow rates of our drip emitters the proper amount of water to go to each of these plants within this landscape in the same runtime. So that's the nice piece about drip, is you can customize with the different flow of your emitters, what goes to the plant, and have one runtime and ensure everything's getting the right amount of water. And it sounds like a lot, but we're trying to simplify it, and we can help you with that. And landscapers and contractors can help you with that, okay? And so this is just a chart of, we wanted to get a similar runtime, right, with different water need plants. And so we told you which button emitter, which emitter to use, and how many of them, in order to get this very low water need plant and this moderate water need plant the same amount of water in a very similar runtime, right? So you can dial that in and get close to providing adequate water. So plants. So this is a fun one, right? We've all heard, as deep as your pot and twice as wide. Really important for root establishment. We always want to see berms or water basins around the plant, right? Keep that water available and in that root zone area. The types of plants we choose dictate that water use again, okay? These are two very similar lot sizes. One is lawn with a few shrubs, and one is all shrubs or moderate use plant material. And you can see the difference in water use per square foot. More than half used in the lawn area, right? So this is why we're looking at these Xeriscape conversions, okay? There's implications to water use. And just important to know that, plant water needs differ, obviously, okay? But, our different plant species, so if you go all native, we want to group all of our native or very low water use plants together in a hydrozone, right? So we have similar amounts of water that we're putting out to them. Same thing with our low or our moderate water use plants. We need to group those together in our landscape. If we had these planted together, it'd be problematic. We'd really have to do some of that drip calibrating to make sure we're getting appropriate amounts of water to them. The purple sage doesn't like a whole bunch of water on it for very long. The euonymus would benefit from a little more water. So the importance of hydrozoning. So just a few gratuitous plant pictures here for you all. Some native woody shrubs. A mix of native and non-native shrubs. Our blue mist spirea does really well here. The potentilla is pretty bulletproof. Some spirea snowmound and Russian sage. Some native grasses, tufted hairgrass, Great Basin wild rye is a large, beautiful grass, and some smaller grasses. A mix of some native and non-native perennials. All of these are really great pollinators if you're interested in attracting pollinators to your garden. Some ground covers, kinnick, manzanita, creeping phlox, rosy pussy toes, and buckwheat. And then just in general, the characteristic of water-wise plants, if you don't know what you're looking at in the nursery, smaller leaves, gray color, sometimes hairy leaves versus a waxy surface, and usually deeper root systems. In some cases, deeper root systems that access water deeper into the soil profile. Turf alternatives. This one's hard in Central Oregon. This is actually a lawn of buffalo grass, which is a warm season grass. It's a Bermuda hybrid. This one is still around. Normally warm season grasses don't do well here. The downside with this is about as green as it gets. And it's very slow to come out of dormancy in Central Oregon. So you're fighting weeds for quite a long time into the growing season before this really takes over, right? So any open niche in our landscape, a weed is going to be really great at filling that open niche. But this is still surviving. So maybe there's a case for this, but just be aware that, there are some maintenance implications here. Eco lawns, you might have heard some talk about eco lawns. So you have a mix of clovers, some yarrow, maybe other forbs growing in there. These are really susceptible. All I'll say about these is depending on the amount of water you apply to them, you're going to have different species take over. A heavier water application, the clover is going to take over, and the yarrow might die back a little bit. Give it less water, that yarrow might be more prevalent, and the clover would die back. Okay, so it's really a balancing act to maintain that good mix of plant material in there. But that is an option. And then more of an urban meadow look. So this is a bunch of different forbs and perennials mixed with native grasses, which do really well here in Central Oregon. Your lupin, your gaillardia, the Oregon sunshine all do really well. Here are just some more Xeriscape inspiration photos here locally. A nice street strip here full of native grasses and perennials. And finally, mulching. So I'll just say this, lots of different types of mulch. Depending on your needs, there's benefits and downsides to all of them, okay? I'll go into a little bit of that. So most typical are rock or plant-based materials or shredded mulches. Cons, those plant-based or those shredded materials are not great for fire-wise prone areas or fire-prone areas. You don't want to put that up against your home. Most people are recommending a rock mulch up to 5 feet around your home. The pros, though, low cost, lightweight, and easy to move. So as you're spreading this through your yard, most people can do it themselves. It breaks down and feeds the soil, and it adds nutrients to the soil. And then, just the mitigation of evaporation or the reduction of evaporation. Rock, little more expensive, heavier to move. It does radiate heat. So again, talking about, increasing the water needs of the plant material with rock around it. It does not break down and add nutrients. And if you get it with fines in it, can create an impermeable layer, which can prevent, water from percolating through it. Pros is it doesn't need to be replaced as often. Okay, lasts quite a bit longer. It can provide weed prevention and can provide or mitigate evaporation. And it's not flammable. So those fire-prone areas, that's a good choice for you. And then maintenance. There's always maintenance, right? And proper maintenance is going to add to the longevity of our landscape, right? These native shrubs, maybe these were planted too dense, and hedging them is not the best way to prune them. Our drip irrigation, you do need to flush it seasonally, right? Clear out those things out of the line. Make sure that it's clean your filters. Make sure it's delivering water. Proper pruning, please, helps with the longevity of your plant material. And then making adjustments to your sprinkler system so it's applying water efficiently. Okay, that's all. That's a whole nother webinar about maintenance. But just know that in that design piece of your Xeriscape, you can minimize maintenance with your design. So talk to your designer or your master gardeners about, your plant choice and your irrigation type. And then just to plug our program, we do have a rebate program right now for turf removal. So removing non-functional turf around your home or business. You'll get paid $3 a square foot as a reimbursement, up to 1,000 square feet. So there's a cap at 1,000 square feet of turf per customer per year. So potentially $3,000 back to convert to a Xeriscape or a low water use garden. You must be a City of Bend water customer. Okay. That's the limitation right now. We are working with Avion Roads to hopefully offer something in conjunction with them. But right now it's just City of Bend water customers. No tree removal. You cannot remove trees in this project. We'd encourage you to plant trees. And there is a requirement to install low water use plantings. We don't want to see that rock in one tree, right? We've thought long and hard about how to reduce the amount of weeds that move in these disturbed areas. And, honestly, the easiest way to counteract weeds from moving in is to have a healthy stand of plant material. If you have a healthy stand of plant material, weeds can't invade it, right? Like an open niche. So high efficiency irrigation must be drip or high efficiency nozzles. There's a 50% plant coverage or density requirement. So if you remove 1,000 square feet, 500 square feet of that needs to be low water use plant material at maturity, right? So that could be 5 large shrubs that covers that 500 square feet, right? Doesn't matter. It's your choice of plants. We just want to make sure that plants are going back in there that are appropriate for the region and that have a lower water use. So how to participate? If you go to our website at waterwisetips.org, you submit an application and we'll come out, and each one of these will come out for an hour with you and do a site consult, run through irrigation conversions, answer questions about the program or your project, etc. And there's a 90-day timeline to complete your project. So these are shovel-ready projects we're asking for this year. And then we'll do a follow-up evaluation once you're done and help you get runtime set up or, come make sure that everything went as planned. And then after that, you'll receive your rebate from us. A couple more restrictions. Okay, we can't retroactively rebate lawns that are dead or were taken out prior to the program. Okay, so it must be, currently living lawn area. Our goal here with this program is to meet that 7.9 billion gallons of reduction. Okay, conservation is a lot cheaper than adding new infrastructure like wells and reservoirs, but we need to have that impact. So we're looking for currently living and live lawn areas. The irrigation, we can't do rebate gardens that are run off of hose end sprinklers or hose timers. There's more work there. you know, you need an irrigation system with a backflow preventer. So any, you know, kind of temporary irrigation, we're not rebating, and it cannot be replaced with synthetic turf. Okay. There's lots of reasons for that. You can certainly install synthetic turf as part of your project. We are not going to rebate that portion of that square footage of synthetic turf, though. And so, you know, with the design piece, we provide this, you know, little sheet here for your site plan. That goes in with your application. It doesn't have to be an artistic rendering. We just want to see that you've got the dimensions of your project in there. You've kind of thought through what type of irrigation and plants you want to use. And again, this is just for the application to review. You're not held to this if that changes during the course of the project, as long as you meet our requirements of the drip irrigation and the low water use plants. Okay. We do have some, you know, references where we can direct you for regionally appropriate and low water use plants. So there's lots of resources out there. And then again, you know, the project method is up to you. Just know that there are caveats with both. And this is a very long-term process, and this is a more laborious process. And then we've got sample conversions on our website if you want to look at what people have done. And then just more beautiful xeriscapes around town. And so that's about it. I know that was a whole lot. So I think we're ready for questions, and I ran a little bit over there. I apologize.
Oh, that's great, Dan. Thank you. That was really, really very interesting. There are a number of questions, so I guess I will just get some of these things out there and we'll get you going. One of the questions that was talking specifically about the street mulching, when you do that, the question was whether a stolen type grass such as Kentucky bluegrass would work with sheet mulching.
Yeah, so again, the process is, and I didn't go too deep into it, but you're doing, what you want to do is kind of water that grass, right? Get some moisture in the soil around it. You want a layer of cardboard or some sort of parchment paper, right? So you're depriving it of light and sun, okay? Then you're taking usually some topsoil or just very thick layers of mulch. So you could do topsoil and then mulch, or you could just do a thick layer of mulch. And then you have to keep moisture on it. Again, so you're trying to promote that decomposition process. It will eventually kill it. There are sites around town that have done it. My old professor at OSU, my soil professor, Ron Reuter, did that in his yard. It's just a very long time until it kills that. And just be aware that if you do that and then you move away that mulch and you plant your plants, you may see some grass regenerate around that plant where you've removed the mulch and the cardboard. So just beware that can happen and requires you to pull that out. But in a whole, that area that's covered will eventually kill that grass.
Great, thanks. One of the questions I think is kind of out there is the pieces that you talk about determining the water pressure and looking at assessing your own current, you know, system, et cetera. Are there, I mean, what, particularly if you live in the city of Bend, and there is an overall question about what other resources are available for Redmond or Prineville, et cetera, but speak specifically right now to the city of Bend, what services you might offer to help people determine their water pressure, assess their current system, et cetera, and then maybe the broader question.
Sure. So specifically in the city of Bend, April through October, you can call us in the water conservation program and we can come out and do a site evaluation and we'll test all those things for you. We'll test the pressure to your irrigation system. So your static pressure, your dynamic pressures, and we'll look through the system and kind of give you a checklist of items to consider. There are also, I mean, we have a lot of contractors here in Bend, so rely on your landscape professionals, you know, for plants and general gardening advice. I hope it's okay to suggest, you know, definitely talk to the master gardeners, right? You guys have lots of demonstration gardens. We put on and you guys host events throughout the year, ask those questions. In the broader area, I can't speak exactly to what Redmond and some of these other providers are doing, but I know you can call up most of your utilities and ask them what the pressure is to your home, and they can test it on the hydrant and at least give you what it is in your neighborhood, right? So that's your working pressure, your static pressure. But yeah, otherwise, rely on the green industry folks, or talk to the folks at Horizon or Ewing and get yourself a pressure gauge. I mean, we've got videos that we'll put online pretty soon that show you how to do that and actually test your pressure. So depending on how deep you want to get into it yourself, you can always do that yourself.
Okay, great. I think I answered I think you answered this question about drip systems clogging after about, a certain period of time. Maybe you can just reiterate that again.
Sure. So, when those drip emitters, whether it's the inline drip, where the emitters are in that drip line, or it's the bug emitter, when they get buried under the mulch, or when they're buried subsurface, it's that vacuum. If you've ever watched, like your spray system turn off and the sprinklers, suck down, and you can actually hear that vacuum. That's how spray sprinklers get clogged as well, right? If they're below grade, all that dirt or debris around them, that gets sucked back in through the collar of that spray sprinkler. And next time it turns back on, it tries to push it out through the nozzle and it's clogged, right? Same thing with drip. If it's under mulch or in the dirt, it has the potential to get clogged. So the air relief valve is like a little burp valve. It just releases that air and counteracts that vacuum where it sucks dirt into your emitters.
Great. A question about like the urban meadow picture that you showed. How do you suggest using a drip system with that? Point source, or more of a drip line, inline irrigation?
Yes. So with that one, that was actually a utility site that we converted from turf. And in that one, we use subsurface inline irrigation because that's considered a really dense planting. You have a lot of plants per square foot. And so you essentially need to cover that whole area, right? That would be hundreds and hundreds of little bug emitters sticking in there if we did point source. So that was actually buried subsurface inline drip there.
Yes. Good. Yeah, that's great. Here's a question. I've been adding drought tolerant plants that won't require much supplemental water once established. However, the existing landscaping trees likely need supplemental water. What's the best method for providing water to existing landscaping trees if I don't have an irrigation system installed?
Oh, well, so, I mean, hand watering is always an option. If you go online, you'll see lots of things where they drill, holes in a 5-gallon bucket and they'll set it out by the tree. I mean, it depends on what your capability and your, how often you're around to do that. But yeah, unfortunately, if there's no irrigation system, it is supplemental hand watering or getting water luckily trees don't need water as frequently, but they do need a larger volume, right? So I wouldn't recommend just like leaving a hose out there and letting it run, because a lot of our leak alerts that we get are people that did that and forgot the hose was on. And 72 hours later, it's still running. You could do, actually they have hose timers if you're gonna do that. So they actually have a sprinkler timer you can put on your hose bib, and you could just time that so it's gonna shut off. If you do have an irrigation system, with those concentric rings, you can just do loops of the inline drip around the tree. And because each of those is 0.9 gallons per hour, spaced out a foot apart, you might have 30 or 40 of those 0.9 gallon per hour emitters on that drip line. And that's putting down a lot of water to that tree. So that is an option. And you can look at the resources and see, kind of a design for that. But that is something you could connect to the drip line and provide a little bit more water to the tree, while your other low water use shrubs are getting those 0.5 or those low flow bug emitters.
Great. Another question was, where can you get those little indicators that tell you your drip line is working? People haven't really seen those anywhere.
Yeah, so your irrigation stores, Horizon is off of Boyd Acres, Ewing Irrigation is down off of Reed Market, Wind Supply is off of 9th Street. These are your commercial irrigation stores. But if they don't have them in stock, they can get them for you. And it's a nice little feature just to make sure that otherwise you're down on your knees scraping away the mulch trying to make sure water's coming out. And so this nice little yellow pop-up is really easy to visually check.
So they're just called drip line indicators.
Yep.
Something like that. Okay, great.
Yep.
Question about the city review. Is that free?
Yes. If you're a City of Bend water customer, you can give us a call, April through October, and we'll come out and do an evaluation for you.
Okay, great. If lawn grass is reestablished in your Xeriscape landscape, do you need to start over again, or is it possible to remove without spraying herbicides?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I guess it would depend, how bad it is reestablishing. I would just really caution you to using herbicides because you can't use a selective herbicide, right? I mean, you're spraying grass, and that would kill any other plant material. I guess that is a tough one. You may have to consider how big of an area that is and how bad it is. You could try, depending on how dense your plants are, smothering it again with more mulch, maybe apply thicker mulch in there and try to prevent some of the light from getting to it. And that might help suppress some of it. But yeah, that's a tough situation.
Yeah. Sometimes just the whole, getting down on your hands and knees and trying to get out, trying to keep it under control before it takes over. It really is a tough problem.
That is a really good point. So if you're doing a sod cutter, let's say you're doing the mechanical removal, you can set the depth that blade is to take out not just the thatch, but actually the root zone of some of that grass. And so the thicker you can bear to take that out, an inch or 2 inches of root zone will minimize the amount of grass that ends up coming back once it gets water again. It will make your sod rolls heavier to move. So maybe do shorter runs, but taking out a good inch or 2 of that root zone of the grass will help, especially if there's stolons or rhizomes that, your grass runs, you can kind of cut some of those out.
Right. A question about mulch, and this is a specific, the biofine that you can get at, I guess, not landfill, so some of their biofine organic mulch. What's your opinion of that?
Oh, here we go.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. What I can say about that is it's organic material. And like anything you buy anywhere, whether it's high desert mulch or instant landscape or any of those material providers, you want a good composted material. Okay. If it's still hot to the touch and steaming, it maybe hasn't gone completely through the decomposition process. But I've used biofines in my yard as an amendment, as a top dress over the winter. I think it's fine, right? You just have to be careful with any product you buy and go to the site and look at it. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's the same thing with the organic material that you may be getting, compost or whatever, to apply to enrich your soil. Just make sure you know the source of that, whether it has weeds or some pesticides, etc. So you just need to be careful of where you get your amendments as well.
Good advice, Pat. Yep.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I think we've answered, unless I've missed some, the questions that were in the oh, here's another question. Where can we dispose of sod once removed?
So not landfill will take it. A couple other options. If you would like to reuse it or keep it on site, you can actually flip it over on the green side down. And if you want to create contours or berms, you can use that as the base to build up a contour or a berm, and then obviously bring topsoil in to cover that. But you want to make sure, green side down, layered. You can create nice little swales and berms. I've seen people roll it up, put it on the curb and put it on Craigslist, and other people will come and take it.
Right.
But otherwise, if you're looking to dispose of it, yeah, not landfill will take that.
Great. One thing I will say that we will be adding some resources to the Q&A before we finish this webinar when attendees have left, so that there are lots of really good resources out there. The water conservation website, your website, Dan, what's that website address?
It's www.waterwise, WISE, tips.org. So waterwisetips.org.
Okay, we'll put that in. Because there's a lot of good resources there that are available to everybody. So, any other questions? Okay, that's great. Dan, you can stop sharing and
Okay.
we'll just go back to this
Yeah.
share.
All right, okay, I should be off.
Okay, wonderful.
All right.
Hold on a second. Now I have to find mine. Oops. Where in the heck's my share screen? Okay, everybody, thank you all for participating in the webinar. The recording will be available shortly, and please don't forget to fill out the short survey following this webinar. Thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And let's see, where is the God?